Very good. I hope everyone can hear now. Welcome to the fourth session of the webinar on finding the key in the Ageless Wisdom tradition. We had a bunch of technical problems, had to use another computer, took forever, but anyway, here we are. So we're ready to begin. And just a very quick review of the ground rules in case there's anyone new. Type questions into the chat box at any time. Everything is being recorded. You'll be able to see it later. I think there's a link sent to you. You can see this one during the week and the whole thing in about 2 months. So tonight we're dealing with, excuse me, our worldview and how it affects us. But we're going to start by asking if you have any questions and to type them into the chat box. Looks like I need an antacid. All right, if you have the questions, you can put them in. We'll notice them as we go along. So we'll have a review, a rapid review and continuation with a little more material about life after death. You can see here the past life review is something that happens to us all according to Theosophical philosophy, and the near-death experiences have documented that in many thousands of cases. Seems that it goes by in just a flash second. Then you see all those other out-of-body experiences which we may well experience at the instant of death. Now, there is what's called a gestation period when the aura is most likely reorganized, released from all physical discomforts, and we still have identity with the personality. We're still the same old cuss. And then, because we don't have a physical body any longer, any desires that require the body, such as alcohol, drugs, sex, anything like that, eventually it atrophies because it cannot be fulfilled. It's like Tantalus, you know, with the apple or the banana just out of his reach all the time. In this new state, we cannot initiate totally new skills. But if we've been an artist in this life, we can further develop it. If we've been a musician, we can further develop it. But we couldn't start becoming an artist if we never did anything with that in this life. The time in this state varies tremendously, but it may last up to 20 years. Then we drift after that first stage after death. We drift into the stage called the first stage of Devachan, Rupaloka, the form stage. Now, when the body dies, you all know the molecules, the atoms, go out into the regular pool, right into the universal pool. So quite literally, we could have an atom in our body that was once in the body of Jesus Christ or once in the body of Hitler or anybody else, you see, because those atoms all they go right at death, begin to go right at death. In this new stage, we have we go into the subtle elements of our lower mind, the higher emotions and mind. Still ourself, but the lower emotions get sloughed off. Now, just as the body's molecules and atoms go into the universal pool, so does the material aspect of our emotional and mental nature as that disintegrates gradually, so that it would, if we have been a very base person, very connected, very addicted to our desires, low desires, then those atoms would sort of gravitate toward the animal kingdom. But anyway, in this first stage of Devachan, we're sublimely happy. It's a dream world, though it's intensely real to us. And we live out our ideals in that state. The discarded shell, these atoms of the lower emotional nature and lower mental nature, fade out on their own plane. And they become a shell for a while that mediums pick up, and they think it's the real departed loved one, but they're really just picking up the psychological remains of the person in a way very similar that if someone could pick up the body we just left. They can't, of course, but this emotional, psychological nature, which we've discarded, sloughed off, as it were, that can be picked up by a medium and fool a lot of people into thinking that it's the real departed person. Then we go into a much deeper stage called the second stage of Arupa. The second stage of Devachan, rather, the Arupa, or formless stage. Now the me goes, the kama manas, the personal ego, the personality, gone forevermore. There is actually what Blavatsky calls a second death. But that death is not like the first death. It is more like going to sleep. We sort of drift toward sleep as we're lying in bed, usually, sort of in and out of it a little bit for a while, and then suddenly sleep. We never know exactly when that moment occurs, but it does occur, and we are unconscious to the physical world at that point. This second death, that is the end of the personality. It will never be reborn. We become the spiritual ego, the real self, the reincarnating ego. And lessons are assimilated or learned even there, perhaps. And that state may last from a few to a few thousand years. Now, about that matter that we have in our lower nature that goes off into the general pool, in Hinduism they say one can come back as an animal or an insect or something like that. The Theosophical view is that is not possible. What little grain of truth there is in it is that base nature that we've just discarded will be picked up and become part of an animal. Many years ago, I had a girlfriend who lived in the village, in Greenwich Village, in one of those apartments where there's a small building, and if somebody upstairs had roaches, everybody had roaches because they went through the pipes and all that, you know. So she would set off an exterminating bomb and leave the apartment for a weekend or something. Come back, everything would be fine for a few months. I went over one time and she said, I just was listening to the radio and a Hindu said you could come back as an insect if you were not very good in a particular life. I was looking around, she said, and I thought, my God, I live in a penal colony. She's looking at all the roaches. So now we come to this reincarnation. There's a yearning for new experience. We haven't completed everything. We haven't become a fully perfect individual. We haven't developed all of the human potential, only some parts of it. So we yearn for new experience. Karma molds the etheric and attracts the appropriate substance for a new body. The psyche is formed, and then the body, actually. Forgetfulness of the past. And then some people say, oh, we have a choice about our parents. And I always say, I most certainly didn't choose mine. But there is a little bit of truth in it, according to Dora Kuntz. She said that just before reincarnation, we have a limited choice of the karma we're willing to try to work out in that life. And working out our karma is developing potential. Do you see that? Our challenges help us to develop some inner strength to handle the challenges, to overcome the challenges. So we can look at the tragedies and the difficulties in our life, painful as they inevitably are. We can look at them as opportunities to develop something of the inner self, some potential that makes us stronger. So many people look back on their lives as they get older and say the most difficult time in my life was the time I learned the most, and it made me a better person. So hopefully we can look at our challenges that way. Not easy, but we can. Now, conscious memory of past lives. Many people think they can remember their past lives. Well, I'm not going to argue with them, but I have grave doubts about that. Because after we die, the psyche is gradually disintegrated. The brain goes. So we can't access memories in the brain, which is no longer there. But also the psyche goes. the Ed, the Mary, the Jack, the Jane, that all goes also. Where then are these memories, you see? But there are cases of what we call quick reincarnations, especially among children who die early, who die when they're only 8 years old or something. And in those cases, occasionally the same psyche is reincarnated. Usually that's not the case. A whole new psyche is built out of what we have done in the past. The energy of the past creates the new psyche, the karma of the past. So in one sense, as I said earlier in one of these sessions, we are our karma. So the quick reincarnations may return with the same psyche. Regressions, hypnotic regressions, my personal view is they don't usually bring up a past life, but the mind, when confronted with what happened before you were born, will create something. And very often what is created helps the person with their troubles in this life. Wonderful! Whether it's true or whether it isn't true about the past life, if they're helped, that's a good thing, isn't it? But for the most part, the only memories come from people who are actually returning with the same psyche, and it happens very often with young children. And Dr. Ian Stevenson has written several books on the subject that have documented many cases that he says can only, they're unconfirmed in the sense they can't be proven, but he says that in some cases the only explanation he can think of is that the child really did reincarnate. Wonderful examples of that, but we haven't got time to go into them all. Look up Ian Stevenson's books, and 20 cases suggested of reincarnation, but there's also some that have been more, he wrote after that, which specifically talk about children, I understand. I mentioned that in, I think, The Secret Gateway, so you can check that if you want. Now, the residual memories. What do we really remember? Remember in the very first session, or was it the second, we quoted Blavatsky about the ethics sink into and take hold of the real person, the reincarnating ego. So we come into this life with a character built out of what we have learned in the past. So we won't steal, not because it's against the law in our country or state. No, we don't steal because it would violate our character. Sometimes when I do a class in New York and I mention this idea that the lessons of the past are ingrained in our character, become part of our character, I will say to a group of people I've never met before, and they haven't met one another, I'll say, now if a woman leaves here and forgets her purse, or if a man leaves a briefcase or whatever, wouldn't you run after them and say, oh sir, oh miss, you left such and so? You would. You wouldn't take the money out first. And you wouldn't do that, not because it's against the law, but because it's against your character. And as you well know, there are many people who have never learned that and who would steal the pennies off the eyes of a blind man, as they say. So also we come back with affinities for certain cultures. We know a friend who was raised Irish Catholic in New York. Christianity never took for her. She was dragged to Mass every Sunday morning and only looked forward to it because they had pastry afterward. That was the only thing she was interested in. We're going to get pastry after the Mass. So she would sit there and count the tiles on the ceiling or look at the beautiful hats of the women or whatever, and couldn't wait for the Mass to be over. But she was very attracted to Chinese art. And she would bring home Chinese art. And her parents would say, why are you bringing that junk in here? She probably, possibly, came from an incarnation in China. It just attracted her. For myself, it's the Roman Empire, medieval Europe, and the church. I gravitated to it immediately. It was just something like Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. So affinities for certain cultures. If you can find no reason in your life now why you are attracted to a particular culture, its music, its art, its history, maybe you came from that culture. So that kind of thing is within the self. Also, having feeling of always known a person. If that lasts more than a few years, it may be you really did know them in a past life. But if it lasts very shortly, it may be a temporary infatuation. So now we're going to move on to the subject of the evening, and we'll go 10 minutes over because we started 10 minutes late. Our worldview and how it affects us. You may have heard the old expression, is it a rope or is it a snake? People perceive things differently, don't they? And we react differently to the same experience. If we see a rope but we think it's a snake, we leap back, we're frightened, we have a reaction, we have a way of acting, don't we? If it's a rope, we act quite differently. So things are not always as they appear to be. Now, what we're going to cover in the rest of the evening mostly is these worldview topics. What is a worldview? What do we mean when we say worldview? How do we get a worldview? Are we born with it? Do we acquire it? And if we acquire it, how? And then we'll end with the Theosophical Worldview and look at what that is. Now we're going to begin with a brainstorm. The question is, in your opinion, what is a worldview? Now you can't have a wrong answer because it's your opinion, and that's what I'm asking for. So no wrong or right thoughts. And what you do is you type your answers in the chat box. But now, just in case some of you don't know what a brainstorm is, no wrong answers, no criticism. The responses have to be brief, just a few words, a sentence at the most. And while you can piggyback on another person's idea, a rule is that you don't criticize the other person. So anybody now type into the box, chat box, what is a worldview? Okay, we have one, being able to see another country's opinion on the same topic. Okay, something else?
Be brave. Just try anything. Just a few words.
It doesn't matter. There's no wrong. No right, no wrong. You just put it in. Seeing the world from other individuals' perspective. Okay. Another one is typing. Yeah. Framework for thinking about everything. All right.
Oh, and by the way, even the presenter is not allowed to say good or bad in terms of anything that you type in.
No, and I'm not.
Just reminding.
Mary's warning me. Okay, there's a few. I'm sure you have more, and if you think of them, fine. Next is, this is a summary from previous workshops. These are the answers I got from doing this in other groups. The nature of matter and spirit. The way a particular culture sees what. No, these aren't other people's views.
Yeah, this
is a summary. Let me see here. No, okay.
This is the summary.
Okay. I didn't put all the people's views in, but this is the summary of what we got. Nature of matter and spirit, the way a particular culture sees the world as a whole. Consciousness, what is it? Does it survive death? Nature of humanity. Meaning of life, if there is any. Some people say there isn't. Our origin and destiny. Did God create us, or did we just come out as a fortuitous conglomeration of atoms? The origin and purpose of social structure. Place of men and women and the relationships between them. Value structure, which derives from the above, and the real or stated worldview, which is actually revealed by our behavior. An example of that is, let's say I am convinced that there is life after death and that death is just a transition to another state and I will come to no harm. And then the doctor tells me I have terminal cancer and I panic. Maybe my real worldview wasn't so fixed in this idea of certainty that life survives death. So our real worldview is sometimes hidden behind what we say. We say one thing and act in a way that is not the same. Now, we're going to use worldview in this way and in another way. Fritjof Capra defines worldview as a paradigm. a constellation of concepts, values, perceptions, and practices shared by a community, which forms a particular view of reality that is the basis of the way the community organizes itself. So there's the cultural worldview, the general worldview of the United States, the general worldview of Christianity, the general worldview of Judaism, or atheists, whatever, it doesn't matter. The general worldview that's sort of common among a large group of people, ethnic group, national group, religious group, whatever. Now, J.L. Myers adds another definition of worldview, both definitions valid, both somewhat different. This one, each individual has his own experiences, and out of them forms his worldview. So that would mean that, for example, different people in the United States, though we share a common worldview, we have individual worldviews which do not always in every aspect conform to the national worldview. Now we're going to use the term worldview in those two ways, a common cultural view and what an individual perceives to be real. That is what is meaningful to the individual. What are their individual beliefs, whether they do or don't conform to the culture in which they live. Now the second brainstorm, done in the same way with your comments coming into the chat box, how do we get our worldview? Now that we know how we're going to use that term, how do we acquire a worldview? Are we born with it? Do we get it somehow? And if we get it somehow, how do we get it? So anything in the chat box. Okay, here's one. Experiences, family, school, media, own experiences, parents, strong early influence. We always get quicker responses on this one once we agree on how to use the term. Another one coming up. The system of views is formed while we live. Think, rethink, get
broke.
Get something, experiences, maybe new, you meant. Traumas, all that, yes, broke. Get broke, experience trauma, etc. Okay, we could no doubt have lots of these. Education, teachers. Okay, that's more or less the general idea, isn't it? So here is a summary of the other one. Experience, upbringing, family, culture, cultural mores, skandhas, that's the British term. I mean the Buddhist, not British, Buddhist term. Media, books, politicians, magazines, religion, internet, friends, TV and radio and documentaries. Gardens and pets, there's one I didn't really understand, but I didn't criticize it. I don't quite know how you get it from that, but I guess you could. You really could. And then relationships and theosophical talks. And finally, the five senses. Most people don't think of that one, but it's a critically important one. The sense data has a very heavy influence on us. For example, they are so overwhelmingly powerful that they override everything else. Sense data tends to indicate we are separate individuals, doesn't it? Not unified. Hearing gives us a greater sense of unity. We can go to a concert, all of us, 100, 200 people, close our eyes and we're united in the music. But open your eyes and everything is distinct. There's I and not I. So that is a very powerful influence on our worldview. We can say all we want about surviving bodily death, but we've not seen any ghosts. Some of us have. I saw one, but nonetheless, most people don't. And so the physical senses tend to override a lot of our beliefs. Now we're going to look at the cultural worldviews, a specific one, two specific ones. The Judeo-Christian and, well, it would also be to some extent the Muslim. And then the worldviews labeled M1, M2, and M3. And we're going to start with a quote from the Bible, Genesis 1:27-28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. That's one creation myth. There's another one in the Bible where God creates the androgyne Adam and takes Eve out of him. Remember that? So there's two different ones. One goes more or less the evolutionary way. This one starts with God creating human beings in his own image. And then the rest of the Genesis quote, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Now, I know that Scripture tells us we should take care of the earth, and most religions agree with that and teach that. But as property, see, God gave us property. He gave us nature. As property, we can do what we want with it. It's ours. He gave it to us, you see. So I can build oil wells in the national parks if I want. And some people think that's right, and some people don't. But there you are. We can do what we want with nature, according to this view. Nature and man are separate, are they not? They're not connected. Nature is alive, but animals don't have any soul. See, they're alive, but they don't have souls. As property, we can own the land. That's very good. If we in New York did not own our two buildings in Midtown Manhattan, 53rd Street, very close to the City Core Center, with a slanted roof, skyscraper with a slanted roof, we wouldn't be able to exist. We couldn't afford the rents in New York. But we own two buildings, which...
Theosophical Society.
The Theosophical, not us, Theosophical Society, if I didn't make that clear. The New York Theosophical Society owns two buildings. And that's very important because it allows us to live. They were purchased at a very reasonable price in the 1950s, and they are now worth literally millions of dollars. So that's a summary of what the worldview is coming from Genesis. And long after people stop believing in God, they still accept that idea. Not that God gave it to us, but that it's ours. We can buy it, we can sell it, we can use it. Now, the Native American did not have that worldview. Man and nature are one. Earth is our mother. Nature is ensouled. The animals have souls, and it's sacred. Human beings cannot own land any more than they can own air. That was their view. Man and nature are united together. There's a beautiful book I read in Spanish many years ago. I believe it has been translated into English. El mundo es ancho y ajeno, and it means the world is broad and alien. I think Alegría maybe wrote it. I can't remember, but you could look it up if you're interested. The world is broad and alien. And it was about South American Indians who were very upset over the Spaniards taking their land piece by piece. It was like cutting their hearts out, you see. And in New York, when, well, it wasn't New York then, but when on Manhattan Island, when the Europeans bought it, at least that's what they thought they were doing, they bought it for a few trinkets worth not much, and the Indians accepted it, but the Indians had no idea they meant they were buying land. What the Indians thought was, we are now allowing you, for these trinkets you're giving us, to hunt and fish on this land that we have been using. But they had no concept of ownership of land. So after they got their trinkets, the next day they found out they weren't welcome on the land they had been using. Now there are three contemporary worldviews afoot today. They are called M1, M2, M3, and you'll see M2 has two boxes. And these were described by the late Dr. Willis Harman, who was president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And M1 is materialism, or materialistic monism. That is, matter and energy is the one and only reality. There isn't any other reality. It's matter and energy, period. We learn about reality from the measurable world, what we can see, touch, feel, measure with our instruments. There's no creator, ultimate meaning, or destiny. That's all just imagination. Morality and the like is subjective and arises from the biological determinants, personal history, or simply chance. That's M1. The second one, M2, is Cartesian Dualism. There's a dichotomy between mind and matter, or spirit and matter. Perhaps the mind survives physical death, but the mind is more likely just a product of the brain, and it dies when the brain dies. Now, this is the most common view in our culture, and it is the reason why so many brilliant people, otherwise brilliant people, get caught in these mad cults. Because, you see, we know someone who was a brilliant person, an engineer actually, and that person got caught in a terrible cult many years ago. Finally, fortunately, got out of it. But the reason is that he could do that is that the spirit and matter are totally different worlds. The laws that apply to the physical world do not apply to the spiritual world. Therefore, God can turn water into wine. He can make the sun stand still, or what it really would be, the earth stand still, of course. He can do whatever he wants and violate all the laws. Therefore, what this cult leader tells him could be true, see? He's not telling him that there isn't any such thing as gravity, or he's not defying any of the laws of physics, but they apply to the physical world, not the spiritual world. So M2 is very, very common. M3 is transcendental monism. Consciousness is primary in this view, not matter. Reality is contacted through consciousness, not through the senses, but through consciousness, which exists independent of the physical body. Consciousness is first, not an end product. This comes closest to the Theosophical view, but the Theosophical view is still a little bit different. And Joy Mills made that rather clear when she added another one, M4 view. That's because from the Theosophical philosophy point of view, both the subjective and the objective sides of reality, that is consciousness and what we know as matter, arise from the same unspeakable reality simultaneously. Cannot separate consciousness and matter. No matter without consciousness. No consciousness without matter. They arise together because they are one. They are two aspects of one reality. So as usual, the Theosophists see things somewhat different from most people. Now, what happens with this worldview? What does it do? We get our worldview from society, cultures, teachers, all those things you mentioned and more. And then that forms our values, doesn't it? That makes us decide what we think is valuable in life, what is important and what isn't. Now, there's a very different worldview between the Vatican and communist China, isn't there? In the Vatican, we have a soul. We survive death. There's a God. We go to heaven or hell. Well, communist China thinks that's sheer nonsense. They don't believe any of that. And the general worldview, some people in China do, of course. But generally, they don't have that kind of worldview at all. Now, those values and beliefs, they create our behavior, don't they? Don't you need the green light, the green arrow? Yeah, yeah, there it is. So they create our behavior. In the Vatican, people pray, they fast, and they go to Mass, all the rest of that. Even the question of abortion, which I certainly don't want to discuss, but even the question of abortion, in the United States, many people think it is acceptable, many people think it is not. Communist China, I was speaking to a Chinese friend, young woman, and she said, in China you get an abortion anytime you want, immediately, no problem. Why? See, there's a different worldview. It created a different value in China than in the Vatican and elsewhere. So that creates our behavior, and then when we act, it gives us feedback, doesn't it? We treat somebody in a nasty way, and usually we get a slap in the face of one kind or another. But even if we don't get it right away, the theory is that karma will eventually repay, and we will get a feedback from the behavior. Now that causes us to do one of two things. Either we change the aspect of our worldview, or we simply change our behavior to make our worldview fit. Example, let's say a mother wants her daughter to get a blue dress because the mother thinks that the daughter looks really nice in blue. The daughter doesn't particularly like view. We all have different choices in color, don't we? Some people like one type of color more than another. We're not all the same in that way. Well, this particular young woman doesn't want a blue dress, and the mother really wants her to get one. So when she keeps pushing it, the daughter gets a little annoyed and said, "Mother, I'm not going to buy a blue dress." Okay, so the mother thinks, what am I going to do? So then she decides how to fix it. They're walking along the street and they see a woman who looks rather similar to her daughter, and the woman is wearing a blue dress and she looks gorgeous. So the mother says, "Now look at there, dear. Look at that beautiful woman and that gorgeous dress. Doesn't it look nice on her? It matches her blue eyes. You have blue eyes." The daughter catches on immediately and says, "Mother, I'm not getting a blue dress." So there's a change of behavior, you see. But maybe eventually the mother catches on. Part of her worldview is mother knows best, isn't it? Mother knows best. Doesn't matter if the daughter is now 45 years old. The mother still knows best. Now the mother is thinking, well, you know, after all, my daughter is 45, and I really should let her live her own life, and I shouldn't bother about this feeling that I'm always right, that I always know what's best for her. So she changes an aspect of her worldview. That's just an example. There are hundreds and thousands that we can all think of changing either our behavior or an aspect of our worldview. Now we're going to have a little fun, I hope. There's an exercise called the Gator River exercise. It has 5 characters, which you see on the screen. Annabelle Lee, Michael, Sluggo, Sam the fisherman, and Sinbad the sailor. The story goes like this. Annabelle Lee lives on one side of the river, and her fiancé Michael lives on the other side. She is to get married on a particular morning to Michael on the other side of the river, where he lives in a church on his side of the river. The night before the wedding, a terrible storm hits, wipes out the bridge totally, and she can't get across. Now in this story you must accept only what is given. You may not add anything, you may not subtract anything, and as in the brainstorms, there is absolutely no right or wrong. Whatever your opinion is, it cannot be said to be wrong or right. So when I ask for your opinion, feel totally free to say what you think. So the night before the storm, the bridge is gone. She cannot swim across the river because there are alligators, lots of them. She cannot take a boat because she doesn't have a boat. How is she going to get across? And she thinks, I know. Sam lives down the river. He's a fisherman. He's got a boat. I'll ask him. She dashes down a half mile or so to Sam's house. Sam, the storm took out the bridge. I can't get across for my wedding. Would you take me across in a boat? He said, oh, Annabelle Lee, you know, that storm took out my nets too, and I have to repair them so I can go fish and get food for my family. I'm sorry, I can't take you across. So she feels very bad about that. She goes back, sits on the side of the river, and sits there crying because she has no other choice. There's nothing else she can do, you see. She's going to miss the wedding. So along comes a boat with Sluggo, no, I beg your pardon, with Sinbad on it. And Sinbad sees this beautiful woman on the side of the river, and he says, how are you, beautiful? What's the matter? She tells him the story. The storm took out the bridge. I can't swim across because of the alligators. I don't have a boat. And Sam said he has one, but he won't take me because he had to take time to fix his net so he could go fishing and get food for his family. Sluggo said, well, I'll take you. She said, oh, that'd be great. He said, I have a condition. Really? What is it? Well, if you have sex with me on the boat, I'll take you across. Well, she's horrified at first, but she thinks about it and says, I'll do it. She has sex, and afterward he says, that was fantastic, sweetheart. I'll take you over. He takes her over and lets her out on the other side of the river, and as he's sailing off, says, have a great wedding. Now, Annabelle Lee, very happy she's on the right side of the river, she runs up to Michael's house, knocks on the door. Michael opens it, and she tells him the whole story. The bridge was wiped out. Sam wouldn't take me because he said he hadn't to fix his nets. And Sinbad came along. He told me I had to have sex with him, and then he'd take me over, so I did, and here I am, ready for the wedding. Michael is shocked, horrified. He says, I can't marry a woman who did that, and he slams the door in her face. Now she's sitting on the other side of the river crying. Along comes the last character, Sluggo. What's the matter, sweetie? He thinks she's just as beautiful as Sinbad did. And She tells him the whole story. Bridge was wiped out. I can't get across. I didn't have a boat. I couldn't swim because of the alligators. Sam said he couldn't take me because he had to fix nets. Sinbad came along, said if I had sex with him, he would take me. I did. I went to Michael, and he won't marry me now because I did that. Sluggo becomes enraged. He goes to Michael's door, knocks on it. When Michael opens the door, he slugs him, knocks him out cold, and that's the end of the story. Now you have had just a moment. I see something on the Jack Lloyd as how is Theosophical View different from the NA? I don't know what NA is, but anyway, we are going to deal with the Theosophical View later, and you'll see how it's very different, I hope, and if not, you can ask me then. So now we have those 5 characters. Now I know people don't like to judge, but we need to, for the sake of this exercise, we need you to select which of the 5 characters, I say Native American, we need to see which of the 5 characters you think is the best, even if you think they're all pretty terrible. Which one appealed to you most? And you can write that into the chat box. Is it Annabelle Lee, Sinbad, Desam, Sluggo, and who else? We're looking now for the virtues. What appealed to you in the character? You can just very briefly put in the chat box what made you choose either Annabelle Lee or Sinbad or Sluggo or Sam or Michael. And just do it out, just have a gut reaction. Don't sit there and think what is the best one. When you heard the story, what attracted you most about the character? And then we'll deal with what repelled you most. Okay, Sam. He's working and thinking about people. Okay, there's one answer. Sam doing what he needed to do. All right. Something else, I hope? Yes, coming up.
Annabelle Lee, persistence.
Annabelle Lee was persistent. Okay. Okay. So there will be lots of choices.
And Sinbad, he was a man of his word.
That's indeed he was. Sinbad was a man of his word. Where is that one? I don't see it.
It isn't. I made that one up.
Oh, my colleague and wife here is putting one in. Sinbad is a man of his word, so she picked Sinbad.
So Sam, not seduced by her beauty.
Sam wasn't seduced by her beauty. He focused on what his family needs. Okay, several for Sam. Every time I do this, sometimes in groups as much as 50 to 100, we get different answers, but many of them are identical about the different characters.
And Sluggo, because he defended a damsel in distress.
Yes, exactly. Some people say they like Sluggo. He defended a damsel in distress. Some people like Michael because he stuck to his principles. Okay, now we have some desirable possible characteristics that came up in various ones. Love, determined, well, that was the same as persistent, wasn't it? True to self, there's persistent, did come up. Reliable, resourceful, honorable, etc. You can see these various ones. So that's the kind of thing that came up for the positive characteristics of the 5 characters. Now we have the negative characteristics of the character. Why did you choose a character as the last one you liked? In other words, what vices in that character repelled you? Why were you sort of taken aback by what any one of the 5 characters did?
And just type into the chat
Yeah,
box.
just put it into the chat box. Okay, Sam, well, that was the old one. Sinbad was an opportunist. Okay, very good. And
Annabelle
Lee's stupidity.
Sluggo was violent.
Sluggo was violent, yeah. Annabelle Lee always wanting what she didn't have. Yes, indeed. Okay, there's a lot. You can say something good and something not so good about every single one of these characters. That's why your choice is neither right nor wrong. We did this once in Pittsburgh, and an older couple was there, and she chose Michael, and she was shocked that nobody else chose Michael. And after she heard all of the things that were wrong with the other characters, she said, you know, I never thought about it, but Michael wasn't so perfect after all. Okay, so then we go to the summary. You'll see various things: drop their own moral standards, impatient, her actions, his actions, it says, caused all the trouble. I rather think they meant hers. But anyway, whatever. Selfish, desperate, no morals, not helpful, inflexible, vengeful, reacted with the gut, not the mind, narrow-minded, moralistic, not understanding. Lots of others can come up. So you will see, you will no doubt think of others. Now, just as a kind of a summary of this looking at things, we see things differently. The man on the left, or the character at least on the left, sees 4. And if you look at it from his angle, there are 4. The character on the right says 3. And if you look at it from his angle, indeed, it is 3. So we see things differently depending on our worldview. And we don't all see exactly the same thing. Okay, I think that we can go to the next. Summary. We tend to agree that all the positive things you mentioned, and all that long list I got from other workshops, and we didn't have time to wait for all of it. You see, all those positive things we agree with. Love is good, right? Patience is good. All those things that we put out that were good are good, and we all agree. And then on the negative side, hurting others is bad, being vengeful, being selfish, all those things we don't think are good. We all agree on what's good and what's bad, but we prioritize them differently. Some people put Sam at the bottom of the list. Some people put him at the top of the list. Even though they know all the things he did, they react more forcefully to one thing than to another. So we perceive things differently. And how we perceive things, as we said earlier, creates our worldview. So I hope you enjoyed this to some extent and that you got something out of it. The exercise actually came from, I think it was AT&T, wasn't it, Mary?
Yes.
Mary worked for AT&T, and she was in management, and they required the management people to take a workshop on how to deal with bias that they might have, especially if they were teaching. How do they deal with bias? And Mary can tell you how she found out something about her worldview and how she changed it. No, she doesn't want to do it. Well, anyway, she wasn't too happy with people who were very loud in the class. And because of that, she tended to avoid them. And then she realized after this workshop it was a bias that she had, and she tried to change that in the future and give the loud person equal opportunity. So now we come to the Theosophical Worldview, and we'll see how very different this is. There are some similarities with the Native American view in that it isn't the same. The question, for example, of animals having souls, mostly Theosophists think that they do have kama manas, that aspect of the mind and emotions, but they don't, except for the higher anthropoids, have the ability to conceptualize. Some of them seem to have that, but very few indeed. So they are centered in, localized in the principles of the body, the emotions, and the aspect of mind that deals with percepts. But when it comes to buddhimanas, the conceptual mind, animals, with few exceptions, don't give us any evidence that they can form concepts or deal with abstractions, you see. So in that sense, we would say the human being, the animal has a soul. In fact, Blavatsky calls kama manas the animal soul, which is part of us as well as part of the animals. Also in Theosophical philosophy, Blavatsky says there is no such thing as dead matter, that even an atom is a life. It is self-moving, therefore alive from our point of view. Now, self-moving does not prove anything, but it is suggestive, at least to me, that the atom is a living reality. No such thing as dead matter. So while the Native American might not quite see it that way, there are some similarities. So here is the Theosophical Worldview. It was formed by an education committee out of the national headquarters in Wheaton many years ago when Dora Kunz was president. And I remember it well. I was not on the committee, but I remember when the committee met there. And it consisted of Dr. John Aljo, professor of English, now retired, and Dr. Renee Weber, professor of philosophy, also now retired, and I think Emily Sellon and others. So here it begins. The Theosophical Society, while reserving for each member full freedom to interpret those teachings known as Theosophy, is dedicated to preserving and realizing the ageless wisdom which embodies both a worldview and a vision of humanity, a vision of human self-transformation. This tradition is founded upon certain fundamental propositions, and what is said following this is really based on the three fundamental propositions of the secret doctrine that this course is based on, really. The universe and all that exists within it are interrelated and interdependent whole. Every existent being, from atom to galaxy, is rooted in the same universal, life-creating reality. This reality is all-pervasive, but it can never be summed up in its parts, since it transcends all its expressions. I believe the Hindu scripture says in one part, having created all of myself, yet I remain. That's this idea. It transcends all its expressions. It reveals itself in the purposeful, ordered, and meaningful processes of nature, as well as in the deepest recesses of the mind and spirit. We live in an orderly universe. To say that there is no order in the universe, as one person put it, is tantamount to saying the unabridged dictionary is the result of an explosion in the printing factory. We do live in an orderly universe. Science is based on order. Were there no order, there'd be no science. So then, recognition of the unique value of every living being expresses itself in reverence for life, compassion for all, sympathy with the needs of all individuals to find truth for themselves, and respect for all religious traditions. The ways in which these ideals become realities in individual life are both the privileged choice and the responsible act of every human being. Central to the concerns of Theosophy is the desire to promote understanding and brotherhood among people of all races, nationalities, philosophies, and religions. Therefore, all people, whatever their race, creed, sex, caste, or color, are invited to participate equally in the life and work of the Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society imposes no dogmas, but points toward the source of unity beyond all differences. Devotion to truth, love for all living beings, and commitment to a life of active altruism are the marks of the true Theosophist. So that worldview is available. If anyone wants that sent to them, they can email me and I shall send the attachment that includes that full worldview statement. So now we coming to our close here. I zipped through things, partly because we started late and partly because I didn't want to take too much time on the review of life after death. Please do ask any other questions in the chat box, or if you think of them after we finish, send me an email. I'll put my email up again in just a moment so you can do that. Did you get something out of the exercise? Did you see how it reveals something of the way we think, the way we look at the world, based on our own experiences? We have someone typing.
It was fun.
It was fun. It is fun, isn't it? People have a good time with it. In a group, I put them in the corner. I say, everybody who likes Annabelle Lee in this corner, everybody who likes Michael in that corner. Oh, by the way, back to the exercise. People who like Sam, and several of you did, whether you realize it or not, and whether you are atheists, theosophists, Jews, Christians, or whatever, you actually are subscribing to the Protestant work ethic. That is, work and family come first. That's sort of a basic part of the worldview that Sam represents. Those of you who do not like Sam are often people who are responsible for getting volunteers, like in the TS or for some other organization. Every time you ask somebody to be a volunteer, they've always got something else to do. Aunt Tilly is coming to town. Oh, I have an appointment. This, that, and the other, and the president winds up doing it all. Those people do not like Sam because they always find people with excuses, as Sam had an excuse for not taking Annabelle Lee across the river. It was only a river. It wasn't the Pacific Ocean. He could have spared 20 minutes, but he didn't spare 20 minutes. You get, and then Michael is a very traditional view, isn't it? 50 years ago, Michael would have had a lot of people in his corner because they would have thought it was terribly wrong to have sex before getting married, even though many of them did. In the Puritan community, by the way, I think about a third of the children were conceived out of wedlock, but they got married because that was absolutely required. Today, it is not required. So the worldview changes over time. Even scientific worldviews change with new discoveries. Quantum mechanics, I believe, upset Einstein no end. The Bell theorem, he didn't like that at all because he called it, as I mentioned earlier in an earlier session, he called it spooky action at a distance. But it changed the scientific worldview. So these worldviews are being modeled and changed all the time, culturally as well as individually. Sinbad. We did this program somewhere in the South many years ago, and an older couple took us to and from the airport, and on the way back, the woman said about her husband, sitting in the car with her, when Charlie said he liked Sinbad, I felt like divorcing him. And then I realized Charlie works with labor unions. He wants the labor union to put the cards on the table. He wants to know exactly what they want. He doesn't want them to beat around the bush. And so he liked Sinbad, and Sinbad did keep his word. However much of an opportunist he most certainly was, he did take her across the river. He could have just said, oh, forget you, and left her on the other side. But he fulfilled his end of the bargain. And certainly the man who worked with labor unions liked that idea of carrying out your end of the bargain. Okay, Annabelle Lee often gets the most people in the group. But on the other hand, she started it all by her insistence on having the wedding that morning. She could have waited, you know. So every character has good and bad. Every character can be looked at differently. No right, no wrong. But it's good to see how people can look at things differently. All right, we're just about 10 after. And I see no more questions in the chat box, but you certainly can email them to me. And if you want that copy of the worldview statement, I will indeed email it to you. There's my email again, and the web page will tell you all about the two books that I wrote, The Secret Gateway, Modern Theosophy, and the Ancient Wisdom Tradition, which has a great deal more about all this, with the exception of the little exercise we did about the Gator River. Oh, Gator River, by the way, is called that because of the alligators, and it takes place in L.A., which everybody thinks is Los Angeles, but in this case it's Lower Alabama. Lower Alabama. Okay, so and next week is the last one on the spiritual life and the Mahatmas, and Mary's not going to be here, which makes me rather nervous, but Pablo will be back. Tonight Jim Bosco hosted the meeting because Pablo is otherwise engaged out in Crotona, but next week he will be the host again, and he will be able to rescue me, I hope, for any technical problems, and hopefully next week we can start on time. We just had to go to a different computer because Mary has to take the one we were using with her to Seattle on Sunday for work she's doing there, teaching a computer programming class in Seattle. Okay, thank you all. Good to have you again, and we'll see you all next Monday.